Her true story from Alabama. I was given away at 14 as payment for a tortilla debt. You were born to pay off my debts, not to sit around dreaming. That was the first sentence I remember my father saying straight to my face when I turned 14. His voice didn't shake. His hand didn't tremble. It was just a verdict, final and cold, like the slam of a cell door. My name is Ella May. I was born in a 2-room clapboard house behind my father's general store in a nowhere town tucked into the red clay hills of Alabama. You wouldn't find our place on any map unless you'd been there, and even then, you'd probably try to forget. My daddy, Thomas Rayburn, was the kind of man who measured love in dimes and obedience in bruises. He ran that general store with an iron fist and a loaded ledger. Men feared him because he extended credit when they were desperate. Women feared him because they knew he could turn kind in the morning and cruel by sundown. And I feared him because I didn't know if he'd ever seen me as anything more than a pawn. My mama Delilah was a whisper in a storm. Gentle hands, soft voice, the kind of woman who spoke with her eyes more than her lips. She'd try to tuck me behind her when Daddy got angry. She'd hum hymns when she thought I couldn't sleep. She loved me in the quietest ways, hiding coins in coffee tins, sewing the hem of my dress with patches she cut from her own. Those little things were her rebellion, but rebellions don't last long in houses built on fear. The night Daddy found the money Mama had been hiding for my schooling, everything changed. He threw the tin across the room. Coins clattered like gunfire against the wooden floor. He dragged Mama by her wrist, cussing and shouting. Said she'd betrayed him, said she was stealing. A week later, she was gone, but not before he destroyed her name. He stood on the steps of the Baptist church, holding up a yellowed piece of paper. Some forged letter with a made-up lover's name. Claim Mama had been running around for years. Claim I was the proof. "This girl ain't mine," he shouted, voice echoing down Main Street. "She's the bastard child of a whore." And no one said a word, not Pastor James, not the neighbors, not the folks who once bought our biscuits and pies. They just stood there, eyes down, silence louder than the lies. Mama didn't get to say goodbye. I saw her from my window, suitcase in hand, shoulders bent like broken wings. That was the last time I saw her face, for nearly 40 years. And me? I stayed behind, even though I was the one he claimed wasn't his. That's when Wallace showed up. Old man Wallace owned the largest cattle ranch this side of the county. He was in his late 50s, with eyes like muddy water and hands stained with tobacco. He'd been buying supplies on credit from Daddy for months. Feed, flour, tobacco, and a whole heap of fresh tortillas Mama used to make before she left. One afternoon, Daddy called me into the back of the store. "You're going with Wallace tomorrow," he said, scribbling numbers into a little black book. Aluti blinked. "What for?" He didn't even look up. "To settle what he owes." I laughed. I actually laughed. Thought it was some kind of sick joke. "You're joking, right?" He looked up then, eyes empty. "You were born to pay off my debts, not to sit around dreaming." "But I'm your daughter," I whispered, voice cracking. He didn't blink. "No, you ain't. You never were." The next day, he handed me a brown paper bag with a change of clothes and shoved me into Wallace's rusted truck without another word. No hug, no goodbye, just the slam of a screen door behind him like punctuation to a sentence I never got to write. As the truck pulled away, I looked back. The store, the house, the tree Mama used to tie ribbons on for good luck. All of it disappeared in the rearview mirror. And I remember thinking, not crying, not screaming, just thinking, this is how a girl becomes nothing. But I wasn't nothing, not yet. I still had her voice, Mama's voice, somewhere deep inside, whispering that I was worth more than tortillas and ledger books, that I wasn't a debt to be cleared or a mistake to be hidden. That whisper would save me, just not yet. Not for a long, long while. The road to Wallace's ranch was long, unpaved, and mean, much like the man himself. Dust kicked up behind the truck in thick plumes, coating my throat and stinging my eyes. I didn't speak the whole ride. I didn't have words for what was happening. Wallace didn't look at me, not once. He just chewed on a toothpick and hummed something tuneless, one hand on the wheel, the other resting dangerously close to a hunting knife that hung from his belt. He smelled like sweat and old leather, and every time he shifted gears, my stomach tightened. The ranch sat at the edge of nothing, A clapboard house slouched under the weight of its own roof, and a dozen cows meandered behind rusted fencing. There was no welcome, no smile, just a flick of his head toward the back door. "You sleep in the pantry," he grunted, and that was that. No marriage, no ceremony, no signature. Just a deal between two men, my father and Wallace, settled over a handshake and unpaid tortillas. I wasn't a bride. I wasn't even a servant. I was a body, a trade. The pantry smelled of onions and mold. There was a cot, barely big enough for a child, and a moth-eaten blanket that didn't reach my toes. The first night, I lay still, heart racing, listening to the sound of cows lowing outside the thin walls. But it wasn't the cows that scared me. It was the footsteps. Every creak on the old wood floor sounded like doom. Every rustle made me flinch. And then they came, heavy, measured steps that stopped just outside the pantry door. A long pause, then a retreat. The first night, he didn't enter. The second, he did. I won't write down what happened. I don't want to remember. But I will tell you what I felt. Not pain, though there was plenty. Not even fear, though that never left me. I felt shame, deep and sudden, like I'd somehow earned this, like being given away meant I had agreed. He never spoke during, never looked me in the eye. When it was over, he'd toss an old shirt on my cot and say, "Clean up, don't bleed on the floor." And every night after that it was the same. By the end of the first week, I stopped crying. By the end of the second, I stopped counting. He never let me outside the fence line, never let me write letters. But one day, I found a brown paper package tucked under my cot. It smelled faintly of lavender soap, Mama's soap. Inside were a pair of soft, hand-sewn cloth shoes. They were too big, like she'd made them for a girl who could still grow into something. And wrapped around the shoes was a letter, folded once, written in faded ink. "My darling Ella, I don't know where they've taken you. I beg them to let me find you. But Thomas is a liar. And this town is full of men who believe liars more than mothers. Don't believe them when they say, 'You're not mine. I carried you through fire to bring you into this world. You are mine. You deserve more than this. You deserve love.'" Mama, I held that letter to my chest like a lifeline, read it every night before I closed my eyes. Not because it made things easier, but because it reminded me. Someone knew I existed. Someone still believed I mattered. Those cloth shoes never touched the floor. I wrapped them in an old towel and hid them behind the pantry wallboard. I was saving them for the day I'd walk away, because I still believed there'd be a day. I had to. Wallace never called me Ella. Not once. Not even when he was drunk and loose-tongued. To him, I was just girl. Or worse, that little thing. He never struck me in the face. Said bruises made him look bad when he went to church on Sundays. But he found other ways. My body didn't belong to me. My time didn't belong to me. My name didn't belong to me. He'd leave before the sun rose and bark, "Have the coffee hot and the eggs runny when I get back." I cooked, I cleaned. I milked cows and shoveled manure. I washed his filthy clothes in a tin basin behind the house until my knuckles bled raw. Then, when the sky dimmed and the stars blinked open, I braced myself for the footsteps, heavy and sure, and the voice that said, "Come on now, don't make me ask twice." Every night, the same script. Every morning, the same silence. There was no school, no visitors, no mail. No neighbors dared question what Wallace was doing with a 14-year-old wife who never spoke and never smiled. In town, he told folks I was a poor orphan from Georgia, a distant cousin, a gift from the Lord after losing his real wife. Most folks looked the other way. The ones who didn't? Wallace handled them in his own way, with a cold stare and threats that made them think twice. I learned to move quietly, to make myself small, to hide the best parts of myself deep inside so he couldn't reach them. But one day, I slipped. I was making cornbread in the cast iron skillet when grease popped and scorched my hand. I dropped the pan, and it hit the stovetop edge, spilling everything into the fire. The kitchen filled with smoke. I scrambled to clean it, hands shaking. When Wallace got home, he didn't ask questions. He grabbed me by the arm, dragged me out back, and shoved me into the chicken coop. "Maybe you'll learn to keep your head straight when you sleep with the hens," he spat, slamming the door. It was mid-January. I curled up in the straw, freezing, trying not to cry loud enough for him to hear. The hens clucked nervously around me, my breath puffed in white clouds, my fingers turned stiff, and that night something cracked inside me. It wasn't my spirit, not yet, but it was the illusion that I couldn't change anything, that I had to accept this life. I wasn't a wife, I wasn't a servant. I was a slave in a borrowed name, and I was going to get out. The next morning, he let me out without a word. I walked straight to the pantry, pulled out the shoes Mama had sewn, and ran my fingers over the stitching. Then I put them back. Not yet, but soon. That day, I began paying attention. Which roads were most traveled? Which nights he drank more? Where he kept the keys? I started hiding scraps of food, counting his footsteps, practicing how fast I could be silent. Freedom didn't come with a scream. It would come with a whisper, and when it did, I'd be ready. I was 15 when I knew something inside me had changed. It wasn't fear. That had long since become familiar. It wasn't even sadness. That had dried up the day Wallace locked me in the chicken coop. No, this was different. It was a quiet tug, a whisper from deep within me that said, "You are not alone anymore." I was pregnant. When I told Wallace, he grunted. "Good. About time you made yourself useful." Then he spat into the dirt and went back to oiling his rifle. That was it. No doctor, no care, no concern. Just more eggs to cook and more laundry to scrub while my body ached and swelled. But for the first time, I didn't feel empty. I started writing area on anything I could find. Bits of corn husk wrappers, old feed sacks, used grocery slips he tossed aside. I hid them in a rusted tin under a floorboard in the pantry. Each note began the same way. To my baby. If you're reading this, it means I made it far enough to give you these words. I want you to know, you were never a mistake. You were my reason. I named her before she was born, Eliza. Eliza May Wallace. Though I hated giving her his name, I needed the world to know she existed and that I had brought her here with nothing but will and blood. The night she came, the stars were cruel. The pain bent me in half. There was no midwife, no light but a single oil lamp. I laid on the pantry floor and bit down on a cloth so hard I cracked a tooth. She came into this world the same way I had, unwanted by the man who owned the roof but welcomed by the woman who bore her. When I held her for the first time, all I could whisper was, "I see you." Over and over again. I see you. Because I had gone unseen for so long, I didn't want her to feel that same silence. Wallace looked at her once, said she looked weak, walked out without holding her. Good, I thought. That meant she was mine. The days were harder now. Less sleep, less food. My breasts ached, my back burned. But every moment she cooed, every gurgle she made, was a song no whip could silence. Then came the fever. She was 2 weeks old. Her skin turned hot as coal. She wouldn't cry, only whimpered like a kitten too small to fight. I rocked her all night, cold cloth on her forehead, singing every hymn I remembered from Mama. Swing low, sweet chariot. I prayed in a voice I didn't recognize. Not loud, not desperate, just steady, like I was willing the world not to take her. That was the first night I realized something. I didn't want to die anymore, because now I had someone to live for, Eliza. And I swore, whatever this world tried to do to me, it would never do to her. She would never sleep in a chicken coop. She would never learn to shrink. She would never believe she was a debt to be paid. And I, his little thing, his girl, his nobody, I would become the wall between her and the storm, even if it broke me. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind where the sky goes quiet and even the cows seem to know something's wrong. Wallace was in one of his moods. I'd forgotten to fetch the tobacco he liked. He slapped the back of my head so hard I saw stars. Eliza, now almost a year old, clung to my skirt and screamed. That seemed to rile him even more. He grabbed my arm, yanked me toward the porch steps. "You're useless," he spat, raising his hand again. But it never landed. His eyes rolled back mid-sentence. His legs buckled, and just like that, the devil dropped. Right there on the porch, half leaning against the old wooden rail, he collapsed with a thud that shook the floorboards. I froze, waiting for him to move, for the growl, the grip. But there was only silence. The chickens fluttered in the distance, but the house went still. He was dead, a stroke, they would later say. Sudden. I didn't cry. I just sat beside Eliza on the pantry floor that night and whispered, He can't hurt us anymore. But freedom didn't come with his death. 3 days later, his sons came. 3 men, tall like their father, but with colder eyes. They came with papers, deeds. A lawyer in a brown suit who never looked me in the face. The land was never in your name, he said, like I was a guest who'd overstayed. But I lived here. I cooked, I cleaned, I raised. You were never legally married, one son interrupted. There's no record of you at all. They gave me 1 day. I packed what I could, an old shawl, a jar of cornmeal, the tin with Mama's letters and Eliza's birth scrap. I tied Eliza to my back with a feed sack I'd torn into cloth. As I walked away, the house didn't look like a prison anymore. It looked hollow, like something terrible had died with Wallace, and something tired had stayed behind. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew it wasn't back. Every step down that dirt road was a fight against the wind. My shoes, Mama's shoes, were torn and soft, but they still held, just like me. I was 20 years old, but I felt 100, yet for the first time in years, I didn't flinch when someone passed by, because I wasn't walking away from punishment. I was walking towards something. I didn't know what, but I had Eliza and a name, my name, and I wasn't going to let the world forget it again. I knocked on the side door of the old Baptist church because I didn't know where else to go. Eliza was fussing in my arms, tired, hungry, wrapped in a threadbare blanket I'd sewn from scraps. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. The soles of my shoes had nearly torn through, but I held myself upright, because broken doesn't mean beaten. The pastor, a kind-made man named Reverend Wilkes, opened the door. He didn't flinch at the sight of me, dirty, trembling, with a baby on my hip. He took one look and said gently, "Come on in now. Let's get you warm." They gave us a cot in the back of the church, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without listening for footsteps. The next morning, the Reverend introduced me to someone he said might help. "Ella," he said, "this here's Mr. Samuel Bennett. He's a lawyer." I blinked. A lawyer? The man standing before me looked no older than 30, with dark skin and a gentle, intelligent face. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and a coat that was too thin for the weather. But what struck me wasn't how he looked, it was what he said. He took my hand, not in a grab, not in a grip, but in a handshake, and said, "Miss Ella, it's a pleasure to meet you. Miss, not girl, not you, not that little thing." I almost cried right then and there. Samuel had grown up in Georgia, gone to Howard University on scholarship, and returned to Alabama to help those nobody else would. He listened as I told my story, not just the parts about Wallace, but the ones before that, the lies, the chicken coop, the letter Mama wrote. He didn't interrupt once. Then he said, "You have every right to file for support. You may not have papers, but you have testimony, and I believe you." He helped me file a claim against Wallace's estate for child support and wrongful displacement. The county clerk looked at us like we were mad. "You got any marriage certificate?" he asked. "No," I said. "Then you ain't entitled to nothing." But Samuel wasn't deterred. He gathered testimonies, Reverend Wilkes, old neighbors, even a midwife from a neighboring county who remembered Wallace taking in that girl from town. We stood in court 4 weeks later. The sons of Wallace sat in front, smug, arms crossed. I stood up, shaking in my shoes, and faced the judge. My dress was patched, my hands were raw, and I had no paper to prove I belonged there. But I had something better. "I may not have documents," I said, "but I have dignity. I scrubbed floors, fed livestock, and bore a child alone. I wasn't his wife on paper, but I lived every inch of the life he forced on me. And I did it without breaking." The room fell quiet. The judge looked down, then back at me. "And the child?" he asked. "Eliza is mine, and she deserves more than a future built on silence." That afternoon, I was awarded full custody of my daughter and a small share from the livestock sale. Just enough to buy a room and start again. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And more than that, it was the first time I stood in a room full of men and said, "I exist," and they couldn't look away. After the ruling, Samuel walked me out of the courthouse. The sky was pink with sunset. "You did that," he said. "I just told the truth," I whispered. "Sometimes," he said, smiling, "truth needs someone brave enough to carry it." And in that moment, I felt it. Not freedom entirely, but its first breath. It had been nearly a decade since I last heard his name, Thomas, but it came back like a cough in the throat. Sudden, sour, hard to swallow. He walked into our shop one morning with that same smug face, though the years hadn't been kind. Thinner now, grayer. But his eyes? Those didn't age, cold and calculating as ever. He didn't greet me, just stood with his hands clasped behind his back and said, "I heard you made something of yourself." I didn't answer. Samuel stepped forward, calm but watchful. Thomas cleared his throat. "I'd come to settle things. For the family name." I laughed, dry and bitter. "Family?" He ignored it. "Folks are talking. You put the Thomas name in print again. That might be fine where you live now, but back home, we've got standards. We got history." Then he pulled a crumpled paper from his coat and laid it on the counter. A sworn statement, stamped by a notary, declaring I was not legally his daughter, that I was born of infidelity, a burden taken in by charity. "If you agree to sign over a portion of what you have," he said, "we can forget all this. Clean slate. Spare the family the embarrassment." I stared at the document. Then I stared at him. "You beat my mother," I said. "You lied to everyone. You sold me like livestock for a bag of tortillas." He didn't flinch. "I raised you, fed you. You threw me out." Samuel, still silent, picked up the paper. His fingers traced the signature. Then he asked, "You mind if I hold on to this?" Thomas shrugged. "Just don't wait too long." He left the shop like he owned the road he walked on. That night, Samuel stayed up reading. 2 days later, he returned with something in hand. "Your mother's handwriting," he said, handing me a folded piece of paper, aged soft by time. It was my birth certificate, the real one. "Ella Mae Thomas," it read, in bold, official ink, filed, sealed, dated. "No one ever revoked this," Samuel said. "He lied, and now we prove it." I sat down, holding the paper like it might break. My name, not borrowed, not stolen, mine. We sent a letter to the town's weekly paper. I wrote every word myself. I told them what Thomas did, how he sold me, lied about my birth, beat my mother, forged a letter to brand her a harlot so he could chase another woman's fortune. I signed it, Ella Mae Thomas, daughter, mother, survivor. The paper ran the story front and center the following week. The town exploded. Calls came from women who remembered my mama, Delilah with her soft voice and kind eyes. Men from church who always suspected something was wrong. Even distant cousins wrote to say they were sorry for believing him. Thomas never returned. Some said he left the state. Others said he took sick from shame. I didn't care, because I didn't strike back with fists. I struck with truth, and the whole town heard it echo. It was still dark when we left, the kind of darkness that holds its breath, when even the trees seemed to lean in and listen. Not a dog barked, not a rooster crowed. The world felt paused, as if waiting to see if we'd really go through with it. The bus pulled into the dusty station at 4:07 a.m. Only 3 passengers boarded that morning, me, Samuel, and Eliza. Wrapped in a quilt, cradled in my arms, her breath warm against my neck. We had one old wooden suitcase between us, tied shut with string. It held a few dresses, 2 jars of jam, a comb Mama had once polished my hair with, and a tin of old letters that had kept me breathing when I wanted to disappear. Everything else we left behind. Samuel paid the fare and helped me up the steps. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. The quiet between us wasn't fear. It was peace. We sat near the back. I pressed my forehead to the window. The glass was cold, but the seat beside me was warm with promise. I looked out at the road we were leaving. The crooked fence, the one light street, the bakery that once refused to serve me because I was just a girl with no shoes. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel grief. Only something I couldn't name, not forgiveness, but something close, a closing. Samuel reached across and placed his hand over mine. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, still watching the shadows roll past. "No one's chasing us," I said. He smiled gently. "They never could." A few minutes passed. Then he said the thing I didn't know I needed to hear. "You're not something that got sold, Ella. You're someone who chose to walk away." The words settled into my ribs like heat on a cold day, because all my life people had named me like I was a thing. Bargain, burden, girl, wife, debt. But now, I was something else. A woman in motion. And motion, I was learning, is its own kind of freedom. The bus turned the final corner, and the town was gone. No parade, no goodbye, no burning bridges, just silence. And that silence was mine. I closed my eyes as the first hints of dawn reached the edges of the sky, not for sleep, but to remember that girl in the pantry, the one who used to whisper, "Someday," and to whisper back, "You made it, baby, you made it." We didn't move into a mansion. There were no parades, no fireworks to mark the day we became free. Just a small 2-room house with peeling paint, a crooked fence, and a sewing machine that wheezed when I pressed the pedal too fast. And that was enough. Samuel and I moved to Georgia, far from the red dust of Alabama, with Eliza still small enough to nap in my lap, but old enough to ask why we always packed in the dark. The town was modest. Just one streetlight, a diner, a post office, and a row of empty buildings that hadn't seen tenants in years. One of those buildings became ours. We swept out the spiders, painted the walls cream, and hung a wooden sign over the front door, "Ella's Stitch and Thread." I made dresses, mended shirts, and taught Eliza to hem by hand. She was a quick learner, nimble-fingered like her grandmother. And on Sunday afternoons, we rolled tortillas in the kitchen, just like Mama used to. Flour on our cheeks, laughter in the walls. Eliza once asked, "Mama, why don't you ever cry when you talk about the past?" I smiled, wiped dough from her brow. "Because I used to, and now I don't have to." Every night, after we'd locked the shop and Eliza was tucked in, Samuel would sit by the window and read aloud. Poetry, always poetry. His voice was like soft gravel, grounded and steady. He read Hughes, Angelou, Dickinson, names I'd never heard growing up. But the words, they stitched something in me that Wallace had once tried to tear apart. One night, he paused and looked at me. "I found this in an old book," he said, clearing his throat. Then he read, "Not a woman broken, but a woman rebuilt, not ashes, but brick and breath and will." I don't know who wrote it. I didn't need to. All I knew was that he looked at me when he said it, not like I was someone fragile, but like I was something forged. Years passed quietly, peacefully. No newspapers wrote our story, no statues were built in my name. But I didn't need headlines, because every morning I woke up next to a man who never raised his hand. Every day, I watched a daughter grow up, unafraid. Every evening, I stood in a kitchen that smelled like home. And every night, I listened to poetry, not screams. That to me was freedom. No fireworks, just breath, just light, just life. And for the first time in mine, I didn't have to run toward it, because I was already there. I am 83 years old today. The hands I use to stir flour are not as quick as they once were. My back hums with the ache of years lived deeply. But the scent rising from my kitchen, flour, salt, warm oil, memory, is as rich as it ever was. I'm making tortillas. Eliza laughs from the porch as she wrestles my youngest great-grandson out of a tree. She's a doctor now, stubborn, brilliant, tender, just like her grandmother before her. Her hands know how to save lives. I like to think I helped teach her that. The kitchen window is open, and the breeze carries the smell of lunch to the front yard where my grandkids play. One of them, Sophie, 11 years old and sharp as a tack, walks in, nose twitching, curls bouncing. "Grandma," she says, hopping onto the stool, "can I ask you something kind of sad?" I turn off the burner and wipe my hands. "Of course, baby." She fiddles with the hem of her shirt. "Was it true? What Mama said? That your dad gave you away? For, like, food?" She says it like it hurts her just to imagine it. I nod. "Yes," I say, gently. She looks down. "That's so awful. Aren't you mad?" I smile, not because it's funny, but because it isn't. And because time has given me more than anger could. "I'm not mad," I say. "Not anymore." "But why?" she asks, frowning. "I'd be mad forever." I take her hand in mine, her little fingers warm in my wrinkled ones. "Because if he hadn't done that," I whisper, "I might never have left. I might never have met Samuel. I might never have had your mama, or you, and I might never have known that freedom tastes like this." I flip the last tortilla onto the stack and nod toward it. "Smell that." She inhales deeply. Smells like home. "It used to smell like shame," I say. "Like being poor, like being owned." She blinks. "But now," I say softly, "it smells like me, like where I've been, like what I made of it." She hugs me then, so tight I feel it in my ribs, and I hold her back like a promise. Later, the family gathers around the table. Samuel's photo hangs above the dining room. a younger version of the man who used to read me poetry under low light and call me Miss Ella when no one else thought I had a name. We eat, we laugh, and no one calls me girl, or debt, or burden. Here I am grandma. I am the storyteller. I am the house's heartbeat, and though time has weathered me, it has not worn me down. When the sun sets, I sit on the porch with a blanket over my knees and a book I've read 20 times. Eliza brings me tea and says, "You've given this family everything." I shake my head. I just gave them a name to be proud of. Then I look at the stars, not searching anymore, just remembering and smiling, because sometimes survival is the greatest story of all. And I'm still here to tell it. When I was 14, they said my name didn't matter. They said I was a burden, a body to bargain with, a mistake made flesh. I was not introduced, I was handed off. They called me that girl or her, and later simply the help. I remember standing barefoot in a borrowed dress, watching dust swirl behind the truck that had taken my mama away. My father didn't even look back. He only muttered, "Now we can breathe." But I couldn't breathe. Not then, because back then, I thought names came from other people, that they had to be given to you, and they could just as easily be taken away. Now I know better. Now, I know I am my name, and my name, Ella Mae Thomas, is carved into the hearts of every woman who thought silence was the only way to survive. I am 83 years old, and this morning my great-granddaughter Sophie brought me wildflowers from the yard. She handed them to me like they were treasure and said, "Grandma, if you were my age now, what would you do first?" I looked at her, that light in her eyes, that truth in her smile, and said, "Exactly what you're doing. Live like nobody owns you." We sat together under the porch fan, sipping tea. She braided my thinning hair with quiet hands, the way I once braided Eliza's, and she asked again, like she had once before, "Do you ever get sad, Grandma, about what happened?" And I told her the truth. I used to, when no one believed it happened, when people called it just the way things were, when I thought surviving wasn't enough if no one knew I did. But now, I said, I'm not sad, because every time I tell the truth, another girl stops thinking she's alone. The stories I once buried in silence have become the soil my family grows in. Eliza, my daughter, my fiercest pride, is a doctor now. She runs a clinic for women who can't always pay, but always deserve care. Her hands are steady. Her voice is strong. She doesn't flinch when someone cries. I know that's because she watched me cry, and she saw that tears never made me weak. She keeps a framed photograph of Samuel on her desk. She says he taught her what love looks like when it's quiet, but fierce. And Samuel, oh how I miss that man. He never once asked for my past to be anything but mine. He used to leave notes in the pockets of my dresses, sometimes just a heart drawn in blue ink, sometimes just 2 words, "You matter." After he passed, I found an entire notebook he'd been filling over the years. Poems he wrote for me. Most were simple. Some were barely legible. But one I keep, folded in my wallet. She was not spared. She was not saved. But she walked out, so others could be brave. I read it when I need to remember why I keep speaking. Why I tell this story even now, when my bones are tired and my voice cracks in the wind. Last year, a young woman came to our town. She'd read about me in a local paper. She knocked on my door with hands shaking and eyes swollen. She said, "I think something like that happened to me, but I don't know how to say it out loud." I invited her in. I made tortillas. I let her sit with the truth, the same way someone once let me. She cried, and I didn't stop her. Because the truth doesn't ruin us. It reveals us, and we are braver than the worst things ever done to us. The town that once whispered behind my back now brings pies to my porch. The local library named their storytelling night after me, Ella Mae Evenings. Kids gather to listen to tales from old women who never got the chance to be loud when they were young. We sit in rocking chairs and pass the microphone like a torch. And I remind them, you don't have to shout to be heard, but you do have to speak. I still make tortillas every Sunday. The same kind Mama made before silence swallowed her. The same kind I once rolled, with tears on my cheeks, praying my daughter would never taste that sorrow. Now, when the dough rises in my hands, I don't think of debt. I think of legacy, of what's passed down when the world tries to take everything but your will. My grandsons call me funny names, Grams, La Abuela Loca, Tortilla Queen, and I wear every title with pride because they are mine, because they come with love, not shame. When I walk into town, folks tip their hats, not because I'm famous, but because they know I didn't break. And even more, because I never let the world decide what I was worth. If you're reading this now, or hearing it, or feeling something break open inside you, know this. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be fearless. You only need to be yours, because the day you stop believing the names they gave you is the day you begin to name yourself. And when that day comes, I hope you remember me, the girl they tried to sell, who became the woman no one could buy. If you've ever been labeled, sold short, or called names that weren't yours, know this: you are not a debt. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where voices like Ella Mae's are no longer silenced. We don't speak to reclaim justice, we speak to declare. We survived, and we still have stories to tell.